Hello everyone, my name is Denise. I'm a Catholic counselor and today I'll be talking on the topic surrendering to the will of God. Okay, so you see when I add the to the will of God, right, it sort of makes it very Christian or Catholic content, but this is actually not the way I want to enter it, although it is a bit the way that I want to discuss this topic. Okay, so before we start, I'm going to take a quote from this book. Okay. Stories of Padre Pio by Madame Catarina Tangari, published by Tan Books. Okay, I got this book off my sister's bookshelf at my mom's house, just for some casual reading, and then actually it's been quite good. I mean, like, during my 1 month confinement after giving birth, this book offered me some comfort. I read like 2 pages a day when I find the time. So I'm just going to read this passage. It's a bit long, but it discusses this topic of surrendering, okay? In one confession, I asked, or this is from page 66, in one confession, I asked Padre Pio for advice about the conversion of a person particularly dear to me. A complicated chain of events stood in the way of this conversion, like an insurmountable obstacle, so that humanly speaking, there was no longer any hope. After explaining the case to Padre Pio, I asked him, Padre Pio, how must I pray? What must I do to obtain this conversion? Padre Pio did not give me any formula of prayer, nor did he talk to me about offering up or putting up with anything. He just told me, bear everything in peace, put everything on the scales of divine justice for this conversion. So forward. In this bear everything in peace, nothing any longer is a weight, because we move in the midst of the peace and joy of God's love, which makes everything easy, which guides and strengthens us, and by which alone we want to be guided and strengthened. Nothing any longer disturbs God's action in us and through us, and thus there is no longer any obstacle to the efficacy of our efforts on behalf of others. Okay. So, this is interesting. This bear everything in peace. And so I'm just going to bring it back to a recent experience that I had. So for this second baby, giving birth was a bit different. Because I changed the gynae. My first gynae is semi-retired. So this gynae, she has she put greater emphasis on, for want of a better term, just on effort. She will insist on pushing, which is a good thing. I'm grateful for that, because I feel that I've gained some fortitude, quite a lot of that, from the whole pregnancy and the birthing process. So and also the administration of epidural is not before a certain amount of dilation of the cervix, so I had to go through a good amount of contractions, which I was actually very determined to avoid. I was determined to have one of those delivery plans that can bypass most of the pain. But this is not the case for me for my second delivery, a natural delivery. So she did a good job, really. I appreciate it, because now I get to experience childbirth, not the nightmare mode, the type that, the ancient people know epidural type. I still had epidural, but I still get to experience some part of the pain before the epidural was administered. So when the contractions were coming, then it is a moment of, like, really, there's nothing you can do. You have to bear each wave of pain with peace, and to trust God in the process. And I just didn't even bother screaming or what, because firstly I don't think it's very glamorous to scream. I know. Some of my friends will say, look at you last time, when you're doing martial arts, you used to scream a lot. Yeah, that's true. But I was in the delivery room for my first, waiting room for my first pregnancy. I saw other women complaining so much. It's like, oh no, I don't want to be like them. I try and be self-righteous. So anyway, it's just a bad look. I just don't want to be one of those people contributing to the noise in the delivery ward. So when the contractions came, it was very painful. They had this laughing gas. I tried to breathe it, but it doesn't help a lot. Anyway, it did cause me to have a deep breath every time the contraction is coming. So I just breathed it and then just breathe out. It was lots of pain, not much pain relief. I just had to surrender and trust the process, and trust that in a couple of hours time I'll be able to hold my second baby in my arms. So it was a great learning experience, and I think that it also improved my prowess, I think my competency as a counselor, because some of my clients who are dealing with more intrusive thoughts, those with OCD, tend to also experience like these thoughts coming in waves, almost like a contraction. It's so painful, and it makes it like when we learn in cognitive behavior therapy, you need to challenge it, you need to dispute it. Sometimes when the thoughts come and it's too intense, it's very hard to do that. So a good analogy would be like contraction during pregnancy. Oh, my hour has come, I need to deliver now, and there's nothing I can do to ameliorate that pain, so I just got to surrender and bear it peacefully. And same thing, OCD, when it comes and it's so strong, the intrusive thoughts, just bear it, don't do anything rash, eventually it will leave. So that's interesting. So I thought about it like, okay, so the front part, like this first 6 minutes or so, it's not really a religious perspective, but let's talk about a more religious perspective. Like, I was thinking that it is human nature to want to struggle, to try to come up with a solution, right? So like, if I just draw back experience from my pregnancy, it's quite scary, firstly, especially I had a miscarriage. When my child arrived alive, okay, that's one fear that actually dominated most of my thought. But it's only towards the end, when I was in my third trimester, that the fear of giving birth, of pregnancy pains started to come. So I wasn't even prepared, because all my mind was thinking that I would bear anything as long as my son comes out alive, something like that. But that's not true, because on the actual day when I was going to deliver, I was very scared of the pain. Yeah. And I just realized that sometimes we need to, actually everything in life is like this. You might say modern technology, human intellect and will, we can do so much. Actually, that's just an illusion. A lot of things are entirely in the hands of God. There's nothing you can do about it. And as trying to run away from that pain and suffering in life leads only, firstly, to a poor developed moral character, poor fortitude. And also it leads to more suffering, because there's a lot of friction as we try to escape the suffering. It is in surrendering to the suffering, I realize that suffering is a part of life, and suffering is good. And suffering helps to train character. In particular, I told you fortitude. And as your fortitude increases, it also drags up other of your cardinal virtues like temperance, prudence, and justice. It has a corporate effect. It drags everything up. So I was thinking about this, like during my pregnancy, I couldn't really have that much temperance, right? Because I used to intermittent fast and all that. But during pregnancy, I said, okay, I wanted to eat properly so that my baby, my fetus gets all the nutrients. So temperance was a bit impacted. I was eating, gaining a lot of weight in a way. So I was like, oh gosh, does it mean that all my virtues will decline as well? I was like, no, because God also offers a unique opportunity to develop fortitude. The loss of mobility, loss of independence, loss of beauty, and eventually the facing of pain during childbirth, all those will pull up the fortitude. So although now I have that time I had less opportunity to develop temperance, I had more to develop fortitude. So it all balances itself out. Later I'll link a video on how these cardinal virtues are actually linked. And also, back to the topic on surrendering to the will of God. I think that is ultimately the whole message and the whole purpose of the gospel, right? To prove to us that God loves us and God has a good plan for us and that we're in good hands. But the problem is, I think maybe for myself and many of us listening, or maybe possibly all of us listening to this podcast, all of you listening to this podcast, life has thrown us with a lot of suffering, that there's a part of us that start to doubt, does God really love us? Or why is God's love so warped, always coming in the fashion of so much suffering? And we start to expect the worst scenarios. In other words, right, let's say the Paschal mystery, passion, death and resurrection, we keep focusing on passion and death, and we don't pay enough attention to the resurrection. So because in the absence of the resurrection or promise of resurrection, we're just too fixated on suffering. We say, oh, God's going to give me immense suffering. So what can I do to mitigate it or to avoid the pain? Because this is human instinct, right? To avoid pain. But in a way, I feel like to become a saint, we have to embrace the pain and to not purposely try to avoid it, which means like intentionally going into difficult situations. Like if you have social anxiety, you'll go to a social situation. You have phobia of getting a job, maybe get a job. Or like if you're fear of aging, purposely don't go for any Botox or fillers. Embrace what is coming your way. I feel that in that way, we firstly the last example about the Botox thing, we age more gracefully that way. And secondly, we also surrender to God's will for us. Like I told you before, God is projecting us moment to moment, like creating us moment to moment, like a projector projecting an image. When the projector is turned off, there'll be no more image on the screen, right? So you see, I studied biology. Yeah, actually, before I became a counselor, my first degree was in applied science, food science and technology actually. So in biology we study that we have DNA, and then this DNA will code for how we look like. And as we age, like the telomeres get shorter and shorter, hence we lose our youth and all that. Our skin gets saggy and all that, and all, like how to say, so-called the transcription of that DNA data becomes a bit bad. So if I use that biological model, then I will be imagining that, okay, my ideal how I should look like is maybe when I'm 30 or maybe late 20s, when I'm a full-grown adult without any defect, right? Which I feel there's some truth in that. But the modern mind, the person tends to fixate so much on that, that when they see an old face, oh, this is not what it's meant to be, and aging is not what it's meant to be. Maybe there's some truth in that, like maybe God, like that's why when we're risen again, we'll be young looking. But I feel that there's also some beauty in the fact that God is also projecting an old person's face, projecting an old person's body. Even for a person who's old and infirm, he's creating that moment to moment, and there's some beauty in that. I think that's why Saint Catherine of Siena says, don't mess with your face, don't do anything with your body or to mess with it, because God will be sad, right? So when you go to the plastic surgeon to have your Botox and all that, or you to adjust your face, you're saying that the plastic surgeon can do a better job than God. So that's not so true, right? Okay, with an exception, for example, you're born with a birth defect like a cleft lip or all that actually requires some changes. But if it's just cosmetic, then I would definitely think twice about it. Okay, sorry, back to the topic of surrendering to God's will. We should surrender whether it's a blessing or it is a perceived suffering. Like if you do the Ignatian daily examen, you notice that it's quite odd. I'm not doing it now. I don't want to give you the false pretense that I do it. I'm basically just running on 3-hour cycles these days, trying to feed my son and get some sleep and all that. But when I did the daily examen, I noticed that the moment of consolations are actually the moments of suffering. Whereas the moments of desolation tend to be the moment where I felt happiest, right? It's quite bizarre, like I'm taking pleasure in I got a trophy somewhat. But then after that, immediately I feel a sense of desolation, like I am like being so absorbed in the honors of this world, now I'm put away from God. Whereas in the moment where I'm like embracing suffering, I feel that God is so close to me. So it is like when you do the daily examen, eventually you do get to a point where you realize that the consolations of this world are actually a desolation in God's world, in God's eyes. And desolation is a consolation. It's like a reverse side of a tapestry. So in that way, shouldn't we all the more embrace suffering? Okay, so that's all for today's topic. And I really do like Padre Pio. This is just one of many books So if you want, you can get this copy. It's super easy to read and offers me a lot of comfort. Plus, his face is so big, so I just put it on my nightstand, and I feel like he's there with me. I feel protected. That's kind of bizarre. Okay, but anyway, I hope you forgive me for that. Okay, so if you found this video helpful, kindly press like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much, and God bless.